The last day before winter break carried a special kind of electricity, the kind that made even the most disciplined classroom feel like it was buzzing from the inside out. Maplewood Elementary looked like it had been dusted in glitter and good intentions. Paper snowflakes dangled from the ceiling tiles, some carefully cut into delicate patterns, others uneven and thick from small impatient hands. Red and green chains looped across bulletin boards. The faint scent of sugar cookies drifted down the hallway from the teacher's lounge. Inside Mrs. Carter's third-grade classroom, 23 children vibrated with excitement. Backpacks were already half-packed though the day wasn't over. Boots sat beside desks. A small artificial tree stood near the whiteboard, its multicolored lights blinking in a pattern that didn't quite match but somehow felt perfect anyway. "What did you ask Santa for?" Jason called out from the carpet, unable to contain himself. "A PlayStation," another boy shouted. "A new bike. I'm getting roller skates." The answers overlapped in a wave of delight. Laughter followed each new declaration, as if joy itself were contagious. At the back of the room, Amara Johnson sat quietly at her desk, her pencil hovering over a math worksheet she had already finished. She traced the edge of the paper with her fingertip, listening to the others talk. Her lips curved into a polite smile whenever someone glanced her way, but she didn't add anything to the conversation. Her coat hung on the back of her chair, the sleeves slightly too short now. The zipper had been fixed twice with a small silver safety pin near the bottom. She tugged it higher when the room felt drafty. Mrs. Carter stood near the front of the class, watching the children with a soft smile. She loved this day, the anticipation, the innocence, the belief that magic was just hours away. But her gaze lingered on Amara. Amara was a good student. Always prepared. Always kind. She helped other children with reading without being asked. But in the last few months, something about her quietness had deepened. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was restraint. As if she had decided, at 8 years old, not to ask for too much. "All right, everyone," Mrs. Carter called gently. "Let's gather on the rug for our holiday share." The children scrambled into a circle, clutching construction paper drawings they had worked on that morning. The assignment had been simple: draw what you're most excited to receive this Christmas. One by one, they stood in the center. A remote control car. A Barbie dream house. A puppy. My mom already said maybe. Giggles and applause followed each announcement. Even Mrs. Carter laughed, though she noticed how carefully some children described their wishes, as if speaking them aloud would guarantee they'd come true. Finally, she called, "Amara, would you like to share?" Amara stood slowly, holding her paper with both hands. She stepped into the middle of the circle and turned the drawing outward. It wasn't filled with toys or bright wrapping paper. It showed a small house beneath a dark blue sky. Smoke curled gently from the chimney. 3 stick figures stood outside, holding hands. Above them, she had drawn a single star. Mrs. Carter knelt slightly. "Tell us about your picture, sweetheart." Amara's voice was soft but steady. "That's my house. That's me and my mom." She pointed to the taller stick figure. "And that's just us." A small pause. "And what are you hoping for?" Mrs. Carter asked carefully. Amara swallowed. She looked down at her shoes for a second before lifting her eyes again. "I just want my mom not to work on Christmas," she said. "That's all." The room went quiet in a way children rarely allow. Even Jason stopped fidgeting. Mrs. Carter felt something tighten in her chest. She kept her smile warm. "That's a beautiful wish," she said gently. "Thank you for sharing." Amara nodded and returned to her spot on the rug, folding her paper carefully in half. The day continued with rehearsals for the holiday performance. Parents began arriving early, filling the hallway with heavy coats and cheerful greetings. The sound of boots against tile echoed through the building. Near the entrance stood a man who seemed to belong to a different world entirely. His charcoal overcoat was perfectly tailored. His shoes shone against the scuffed school floors. He carried himself with quiet confidence, though there was something observant in his eyes. David Whitmore introduced himself politely to the principal and explained that his company sponsored several district programs. He had been invited to attend the holiday performance. Mrs. Carter noticed him as she guided her students into position on the small stage in the multi-purpose room. She recognized the name immediately. Whitmore Holdings funded half the city's new developments. The Whitmore Foundation's logo was on scholarship banners and hospital wings. The children began to sing, their voices wobbling and sweet. Some sang too loudly, others barely above a whisper. Amara stood in the second row, hands clasped in front of her, singing carefully as if she didn't want to take up too much space. David watched from the back. He wasn't sure why his attention kept returning to her. Perhaps it was the way she glanced at the audience, searching, then settling into acceptance when she didn't find who she was looking for. After the performance, parents hugged children, snapping photos and praising off-key solos. The room slowly emptied. Amara helped stack folding chairs without being asked. "Does Santa ever skip houses?" she asked quietly as Mrs. Carter gathered sheet music. Mrs. Carter looked at her. "Why would you think that?" Amara shrugged lightly. "Mom says Santa's busy. And we don't have a chimney anyway." Her tone was practical, not bitter. From a few feet away, David froze. He hadn't meant to overhear. But the words struck him with unexpected force. Mrs. Carter crouched so she was eye level. "Santa finds a way," she said softly. Amara nodded, though her eyes suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. When she pulled on her coat, David noticed the two short sleeves. When she walked toward the exit alone, he noticed there was no one waiting. He approached Mrs. Carter after the room had nearly cleared. "The little girl," he said carefully. "Amara." Mrs. Carter hesitated, then sighed quietly. "Her mother works double shifts at the hospital cafeteria. It's been a hard year. Her father passed away in the spring. They're managing, but," she didn't finish the sentence. David looked around at the decorated walls, the paper snowflakes, the blinking tree lights. "What is she getting for Christmas?" he asked. Mrs. Carter's silence was answer enough. That evening, David stood in his penthouse apartment overlooking the glittering city skyline. His own Christmas tree towered near the windows, professionally decorated in silver and white. Gifts sat beneath it, wrapped in flawless paper. He poured a glass of expensive scotch but didn't drink it. Instead, he saw a drawing of a small house under a dark blue sky. 3 stick figures. A single star. He remembered another small apartment long ago. A single mother. Cold mornings. The feeling of wanting something simple, time, presence, warmth, and knowing it cost more than money. He had built an empire since then. Towering buildings, international contracts, private jets. Yet somehow, he had forgotten the weight of a child's quiet wish. He set the glass down untouched. Instead of delegating, instead of sending a generic donation, instead of attaching his name to another charitable press release, David Whitmore reached for his phone and made the call himself. "Get me the address for Amara Johnson's family," he said evenly. "And clear my schedule tomorrow." There was a brief silence on the other end. "Sir, I have somewhere more important to be." Christmas Eve settled over the city in a hush of silver frost and distant church bells. In the small apartment on the 3rd floor of a worn brick building, the heater rattled unevenly, fighting against the cold creeping through thin window panes. The living room was modest but carefully kept. A faded couch sat beneath a window decorated with paper snowflakes taped along the glass. In one corner stood a 3-foot artificial tree, its branches slightly bent from years of folding and unfolding. Amara knelt on the floor beside it, entangling a short string of lights. Her fingers worked patiently, her tongue peeking out in concentration. When she finally plugged them in and they flickered to life, 2 bulbs dimmer than the rest, her face glowed with quiet pride. "Mom, look," she called softly. Her mother stepped out of the narrow kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She wore her hospital cafeteria uniform already, though her shift wouldn't start for another hour. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes, but she smiled brightly when she saw the tree. "It's beautiful, baby," she said. They didn't have ornaments, not the store-bought kind. Instead, they hung handmade decorations, folded paper stars, a candy cane from last year saved carefully in plastic, a ribbon tied into a bow. Amara reached up to place the final paper angel at the top. Her mother's phone buzzed. The smile faded slightly as she checked the screen. She closed her eyes for a brief second before looking back at her daughter. "They need someone to cover tonight," she said gently. "Double shift." I tried to say no, but... Amara nodded before her mother could finish. "It's okay," she said quickly. "We can celebrate tomorrow." Her mother knelt and pulled her into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry." Amara wrapped her arms around her waist. "Maybe Santa comes late anyway," she whispered with a small grin. Her mother kissed her forehead, holding back tears. "Maybe he does." An hour later, the apartment felt quieter. The ticking clock on the wall sounded louder than usual. Amara sat on the couch with a library book resting in her lap, though she hadn't turned the page in several minutes. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and steady. Then headlights swept across the ceiling. A sleek black SUV rolled slowly down the narrow street, its engine purring smoothly before coming to a stop in front of the building. Curtains shifted in neighboring windows as curious eyes peeked out. The driver's door opened. David Whitmore stepped out, dressed not in a flashy suit but in a simple dark wool coat and gloves. Snowflakes caught in his hair as he looked up at the building, double-checking the address in his hand. He walked to the back of the vehicle and opened the trunk. Inside were several carefully chosen items, but he lifted only one medium-sized cardboard box. No logos. No gold wrapping. Just plain and sturdy. He carried it up the narrow staircase, noticing the chipped paint along the railings and the faint scent of old wood and laundry detergent in the hallway. When he reached apartment 3B, he paused for a moment, then knocked gently. Inside, Amara's head snapped toward the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. She patted across the floor and opened it just a crack. Yes, she asked cautiously. David crouched slightly so they were eye level. His expression was warm, not imposing. Hi, Amara, he said softly. I'm Mr. Whitmore. I saw you sing at school. Recognition flickered across her face. You were in the back, she said. He smiled. That's right. She opened the door a little wider but kept one hand on the handle. Did I forget something? No, he said gently. You didn't forget anything. He held out the box. I heard what you said in class, he continued carefully. About your wish. Amara's eyes widened slightly. You weren't supposed to hear that. I know, he admitted. But I'm glad I did. She hesitated before accepting the box. It was heavier than she expected. She carried it carefully to the small coffee table and knelt to open it. The first thing she saw was a winter coat, deep purple, soft and thick, with a hood lined in warm fleece. Her fingers brushed across it slowly. It's my size, she whispered. Beneath it were sturdy boots with fur inside, perfect for snow days. A stack of books she recognized instantly, stories she had checked out from the school library more than once because she loved them so much. A watercolor art set with brushes neatly wrapped in plastic. Thick drawing paper. Her breathing grew shallow with disbelief. At the bottom of the box lay an envelope. For your mom, David said quietly. Amara looked up at him, her voice barely audible. Is this from Santa? David's eyes softened. You could say that. She stood suddenly and ran toward him, wrapping her arms around his waist in a spontaneous hug. He froze for half a second before gently returning it. Thank you, she said into his coat. Later that night, the apartment door opened again. Amara's mother stepped inside, exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. She stopped short when she saw the lights on, the tree glowing brighter somehow. Amara, she called. Her daughter rushed forward, nearly bouncing. Mom, you have to see. David stepped respectfully aside as Amara pulled her mother toward the living room. The open box sat on the table, treasures carefully arranged. Her mother looked from the coat to the boots to the art supplies, confusion flooding her face. What is this? She asked, her voice trembling. Amara handed her the envelope. Her mother opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter and official documents. 1 year of prepaid rent. A scholarship fund established in Amara's name for her future education. An offer of stable employment at one of Whitmore Holdings' community centers, regular hours, full benefits, no night shifts required. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. She looked up at David, who stood quietly near the doorway. Why? She whispered. He glanced around the small apartment, the handmade decorations, the care taken with so little. Because no child should think they've been forgotten, he said simply. And no mother should have to choose between paying rent and being home on Christmas. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed. There's no press, he added gently. No publicity. This isn't charity for headlines. It's just the right thing. Snow continued to fall outside, softening the edges of the city. Inside the tiny apartment, something shifted. Not just circumstances. Hope. That night, for the first time in months, Amara's mother turned off her alarm clock. She hung the new coat by the door. She traced her fingers over the scholarship papers, hardly believing they were real. And on Christmas morning, when Amara woke to sunlight reflecting off fresh snow and laughter filling their small living room, she didn't measure the day by how many gifts sat beneath the tree. She measured it by the simple, extraordinary fact that her mother was home. And somewhere across the city, a billionaire who had everything finally understood what it meant to give something that truly mattered.